It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the audio podcast, Scott Ryan. Hi, Scott. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thanks for coming on. Coming back, I should say. We were just talking about that you were on the VE show just about a year ago. And as I remember, you had just moved or something.
Yes, I had just moved to Florida. You're right.
Yeah.
It was like the day we got there.
Yeah.
And I mean, I had to set everything up. I totally forgot about that.
You were one of the few guests that came on the VE show and was actually standing up during the interview.
Yeah, I didn't. I don't think we had unpacked or anything. I have really forgotten about that. That was a horrible day.
Well, I just remembered it now. It's all coming back to me now.
Yeah.
Now that I'm
Thanks
talking
for bringing
to you.
it up.
So you're comfortably settled in now a year later?
Yes, we love it so much. It's beautiful down here. I used to live up north where it was cold and miserable, and now it's warm and beautiful.
Where did you come from to Florida?
From Columbus, Ohio.
Oh, yeah, you get a cold winter there.
Oh,
That's
and
for
it
sure.
lasts forever.
Well, I think you did well. Actually, last time you were on, you were promoting your book Moonlighting, and it's sad. Did you see the latest news on Bruce Willis?
I did. It really broke my heart, and I kind of suspected it, to be honest, when I was working on the book, because they kept setting up interviews with Bruce through Glenn Gordon Caron, who was the executive producer of Moonlighting, and it was going to happen, get canceled. Happen, then it would fall through, probably 5 or 6 times. And Glenn was sort of cagey about saying why, because I think he knew, and they were trying. I think Bruce wanted to so badly, but he just couldn't. There was just no way, because he was losing his cognitive abilities.
Yeah.
And I couldn't talk about it then when everyone was like, why wasn't Bruce in? Because I didn't really know for sure, and it wasn't my place to say. So, it breaks my heart I didn't work on this book 5 years earlier.
Well, so you never got the chance to talk to him then?
I never did.
Oh, that's too bad. It was interesting because I just interviewed Mohammed Kareem a couple of weeks ago, and he is in what I would assume is going to be the last Bruce Willis movie. It's called A Day to Die. It just came out. It's on streaming and everywhere else. But I interviewed him. He didn't say anything about it because it hadn't been officially released. The news hadn't been officially released. But when I watched the screener, there was something just not quite right with Bruce. He wasn't his old self, and I think, unfortunately, the movie was a pretty good movie, but I think it suffered a little bit because Bruce just didn't seem like he was 100%.
Well, I'll tell you, there's an article in the LA Times by Meg James and Amy Kaufman, and when you read that, you really can understand that he wasn't there. It's very sad. It's a sad way to end a career that was so alive, and I don't know. I'm probably not going to watch any of those films that he made. I'm going to remember him in The Sixth Sense and Moonlighting and Pulp Fiction and Die Hard, and that's my Bruce Willis.
Yeah, and Red. I love the Red 2.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
That
That was another good one.
So anyways, so you've got a new book out, and I'm looking at the cover. It's called Fire Walk With Me, Your Laura Disappeared. Now, I'm having trouble figuring out who's on this cover. Okay, is that Susan Sarandon?
No. We have Grace Zabriskie is the mom on the side, and then the middle is Cheryl Lee, who plays Laura Palmer on Twin Peaks, and then you have Ray Wise, who plays Leland Palmer, and Grace plays Sarah Palmer. So that's basically the Palmer family, which is the center of Twin Peaks.
Oh, okay. See, I never watched that show, so I wouldn't know. But it's funny because in this picture, it's kind of faded. I'm assuming that was done deliberately.
Yes.
And the mom on the left looks exactly like Susan Sarandon. And I thought that the man was Dick Clark, but okay, obviously not.
That'd be a heck of a group, though. Yeah, I mean, the Laura is the center, and when I designed the cover, I sort of faded her out because, she's the Laura that's disappearing.
All right, so tell me about the book.
Well, 30 years ago in 1992, David Lynch, who created Twin Peaks with Mark Frost, wanted to bring Twin Peaks to the big screen. The show had been canceled really, without anyone knowing it was going to go in 91. So it ends with a big cliffhanger. And then it was canceled. And so his idea was to sort of revive Twin Peaks as a film and then probably make 2 or 3 other movies. Well, the problem with that was the movie bombed. I mean, it did so poorly, and every critic hated it, and it was one of those moments where just everyone piled up on top of David Lynch. But, like a lot of great art, whether the critics like it or not, fans find it. And over the years, it has really become this cult classic, and has sort of climbed its way up to the top of David Lynch's films. He did Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, The Elephant Man, Dune. He's done a lot of films. And I wanted to look at this film 30 years later and sort of see how it resurrected itself.
So this was a film that he made based on the TV series?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But it's a prequel. So, it starts in the 7 days before Twin Peaks the series began. The show begins with Laura Palmer being dead, wrapped in plastic. And it was a series that was basically a soap opera spoof in a way. But it's really a murder mystery. Well, in the film, you see Laura Palmer alive, and you sort of see what happened leading up to her death.
Oh, okay. So is the film out and available around somewhere?
Yes, it streams. It's actually right now on HBO Max, which really surprised me because they don't usually have it, because the Twin Peaks came back in 2017 and it was on Showtime. So you would think Fire Walk with Me would be on Showtime, but right now it's streaming on HBO.
Why do you think it bombed?
I think for 2 reasons. One, because Twin Peaks ended in a major cliffhanger. The film doesn't address the cliffhanger, and that really angered fans. They wanted to find out what happened. Agent Cooper is sort of the hero of the television series, and he is trapped in this evil spot. And so people wanted to know what happened to Cooper. Well, that's not what the movie's about. The movie's about Laura Palmer, the girl at the center of the mystery. So that's why fans were disappointed. I think for critics, they just weren't ready for this dark look at, one of the most gruesome topics you can have a film be about. So it's a very painful, emotional film. And through the years, it's sort of become a beacon of hope and resurrection for people who have gone through sexual abuse from a parent. And, if you're making a film like that, there's not going to be a lot of laughs in it. It's just a very dark and disturbing film.
Yeah, there's no way to do that in a light and fluffy kind of
right. And but it is very otherworldly, and you have to watch it a couple times before you get it.
I was just thinking about what you said. Can you imagine if they had made a Dallas film and not mentioned JR's murder at all?
Well, yeah, and that was part of the problem.
Yeah, I could see why that would be a bad thing.
Yeah, and Agent Cooper is probably, which is Kyle MacLachlan, he's probably in the film for 5 to 7 minutes maybe, and it just bothered people. But I think as time goes by and people aren't looking for it for that, then they can see it for what the film actually is. And so I was able to interview the actress who played Laura Palmer, the editor of the film, Mary Sweeney, the director of photography, Ron Garcia, and the producer of the film, Greg Feinberg. So you sort of get the backstory of how this came to be, and also how they dealt with working on this piece of art that was just crucified. Quentin Tarantino very famously said when he saw it, it seems like David Lynch has his head up his own ass. And, there were just all these nasty comments that 30 years later don't quite sit well.
Well, speaking of David Lynch, I mean, his films to me are kind of hit and miss. Like, I like Dune, okay? But I did not like Mulholland Drive at all. So there's very little consistency for me personally with his films. Whereas, like, if you watch a Scorsese film, you know exactly what you're going to get.
Well, David Lynch changed as an artist quite a bit. I mean, Elephant Man is a beautiful film. I mean, it was Oscar nominated. I think he was nominated for an Oscar. He didn't win, but he was young then. When he made Dune, he was young. When he made Mulholland Drive, he had been eaten alive by Hollywood, and that's really what Mulholland Drive is about. It's basically about someone who goes to Hollywood with this dream of being famous, and instead they're just crushed,
right,
and eaten alive. So it's sort of which side, you have the young, positive David Lynch, you sort of got the older, and Fire Walk with Me is right in the middle. It's sort of when he's tipping to not being so struck to story.
Well, okay. When you put it that way, then it puts it a little bit more into perspective. I didn't take into account his own personal life. Do you know what I mean? I was just critiquing the film. But if you do it that way, it puts it into context a little bit.
Well,
better.
And it's actually, the thing about Mulholland Drive, and I'm not saying that you should rewatch it or, everyone accepts art for as it is. But basically that movie was a TV pilot for ABC. And ABC said, no, we're never putting this on the air. And he was heartbroken. And then he came up with the idea of the end. So the first 90 minutes of that movie was filmed a year before. And then the last 40 was filmed like a year later. And the first part is the positiveness of Hollywood, and the last 40 minutes are just like, there is no dream. It's all, crushing, because that's how he felt. Because, he had worked so hard on this piece of art, and they turned it away. So if you ever do rewatch it, you'll see there's a moment in the film where they turn the key on a blue box, and then everything gets dark. And that's basically just what happened to David Lynch. He had hope, and then he had no hope. The funny thing is, when the movie came out, it was a critical success, and he was nominated for Best Director that year. So go figure.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of to each his own, because you remember the film Deer Hunter?
Sure. With Robert De Niro.
With Robert De Niro. Now, that film to me was great, except that they should have cut 25 minutes out of that wedding scene, because it just was too long. And in fact, when it finally came out in digital format, I actually did that. I actually took the copy and put it on Adobe, right? And just chopped the wedding scene, about 20 minutes out of it, and put it back together. And I thought, oh, that's much better now.
And a lot of people do that with Lynch's work too. There's a lot of fan edits out there, including Fire Walk with Me, because there are deleted scenes, and people put them back in. And, that's the thing about the digital world. You can be your own director, whether the director likes it or not.
And you can edit other people's work without them knowing about it.
Yeah, how about that? That's really funny.
Where do you get all your fodder? Are these just, you decide of a particular show that you like and you just sort of go for it?
I mean, it kind of depends if I can get the interviews. I mean, that's where a lot of it goes to. with this one, I do a magazine about Twin Peaks, so I'm very much in the Twin Peaks world, but I've never written a book about it. And I thought, well, it's the 30th anniversary. This is the time to do it. And my next book that I'm working on now is about movies that came out in the 90s. And I'm picking 2 films a year from that decade and just sort of talking about them and sort of comparing it to how they make movies now and how there really aren't grown-up movies anymore. And I'm trying to get interviews for that, and that's going to sort of help with what you pick. I mean, I wish I was famous enough that I could just like pick a work and I knew I'd get the interviews, but it doesn't always work that way.
Give me one example or one title of one of the ones from the 90s that you might do.
Well, you mentioned Scorsese. I'm starting the book off with Goodfellas. That came out in 1990.
Yeah.
And, just to prove that here we're talking about, my overall concept is that in the 90s, if you put storytelling on one axis and you put like the ability to make a film as far as technology goes, so like we've got good cameras, we've got good special effects, we know how to do a score. The center of that would be the 90s. So in the 80s, you might have good storytelling, but they didn't quite, it feels old. The pacing's a little old. But if you go in the 2000s, it's all special effects, and you don't have a whole lot of storytelling. So I'm starting it off with Goodfellas, and then taking it through, and then in 1999, Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace comes out with Jar Jar Binks as a digital character, and you basically say, there's where your decade went. You started with with Goodfellas, and you ended with Jar Jar Binks.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I'm in complete agreement with you. Interestingly enough, the good stories have all gone indie, because I interview a lot of indie filmmakers, and they're the ones that are doing the good romantic comedies, dramas. The script writing has gone there. The big studios are doing the tentpole CGI galore stuff. And, they're still out there. They just moved. It's similarly to music. I've said that the best music now is all indie, too. And that the stuff that's on the major labels is just the CGI of music,
I totally agree. And one of the things I'm trying to say in this book is that I'm not saying there aren't any good movies anymore. That's not my point. My point is in the 90s, you saw these movies on big screens. Like, they came everywhere. There's a small movie called Two Girls and a Guy that Robert Downey Jr., Heather Graham, and I'm going to blank on her last name, but it's Natalie Wood's daughter, are in. And it's a real small film, but it actually came to my hometown because movies went places. And now, if it's not a superhero movie, like the indie movies you're talking about, they're not going to play in IMAX. No, it's just not happening.
They go right to Netflix, which I don't know. I think it remains to be seen whether that's good or bad, because let's face it, streaming is huge now. And the bigger the TVs get in people's houses, the less likely they are to go to the theater.
Yeah, but will the people with money really want to make those films? Would they take the time? Would Pulp Fiction have changed so much as it did in 94, which is, that's the film I'm focusing on for certain in 94. That changed so much, and it mattered that you went to the theater and saw it, and
well, that's
all of
true.
that. So.
Yeah.
But I agree. I don't want to go see any movies anymore. Like, it's so much better to watch it at home.
Yeah.
But I still want a good grown-up story with a grown-up cast and all of that. So it's been an interesting thing. I'm watching 155 movies from the 90s, and then I'm going to put them in categories and just talk about them in themes. So it's a really interesting project. So that's what I'm working on now.
When do you think that's going to come out?
Well, it's scheduled for 2024. I'm trying to hit right in the middle of the 30 years because it's just going to take a while. I have so many films to watch. and write about. That I run a publishing company called Fayetteville Mafia Press, so I get to say when it comes out, which is nice. But I said, like, I need a year just to work on it before I even start writing.
You're going to need a year just to watch all the films.
Yeah. I mean, it is every Friday and Saturday night, my wife and I watch a film from the 90s, and I've loved every one. I mean, I'm not even exaggerating. Like, they're all really good.
You know where the big transition is that you can see from 90s to 2000s is when every character has a smartphone. I've noticed there's a break there. There's at a point where there are no smartphones, and then maybe somebody has a BlackBerry, maybe it's like a time marker, just from the phones. Because even as something like I was watching last night, I watched a rerun of Deal or No Deal, and one of the prizes that they gave away was a Christmas special, and they gave away a media player. And I looked at this thing and I go, oh my God, what a dinosaur.
Right.
Nobody has that anymore because it's all part of your smartphone now.
Right.
And
that is really funny. Well, I'll tell you what annoys me is now in every show, I have to read the character's phone. And it's really annoying me. Look, I'm putting my phone down to watch a story. Don't make me text someone on your show. I don't want to read their texts. I'm so annoyed at reading the phone. And I'm getting older, and I can't even read that font anyway. And so many times my wife and I say, what did that say? And I say, who cares?
Well, it's true. And I can't tell you how many movies I've watched as of late where the phone and the texting between two characters was the central theme of the movie. It really...
And it's just so fascinating. One of the sections I'm doing is on teenage films. So I watch like Pump Up the Volume with Christian Slater. I watch 10 Things I Hate About You with Heath Ledger. And all the characters have to talk to each other. All the teenagers are interacting because there's no phones. And I think it's like amazing to watch. So I realize I should get my author picture on that book is better be like an old crotchety guy, because there's no way people are going to be mad at me for that book. I'm calling it the 90s, the last decade of cinema.
Oh,
so
nice.
People will be mad at me, and I can take it. I'm ready for it.
All right. Well, I think on that note, we're going to wind this down. Thanks so much for coming on. Do you have a website you want to give out?
Yes, you can go to scottryanproductions.com. That's my personal website, and my company's is FayettevilleMafiaPress.com.
All right, great. Well, listen, keep us in mind because I want to have you back when the 90s book comes out. I think we could have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good one. So that's late 2024. So I guess I'll see you in 2 years.
If we're both still around, we'll do it. Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Thanks for coming back, Scott. Nice talking.